I still remember the exact way she smiled at me. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a small, satisfied smirk, the kind people give when they believe the game is already over. My daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and said calmly, "You're finished." No anger, no hesitation, just certainty. At that moment, everyone else in the room stayed silent. My son stared at the table, and I realized something painful but important. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. This had been planned for a long time. I'm not a poor man. I'm not weak, and I'm certainly not stupid. For over 30 years, I worked quietly, built businesses, invested carefully, and made sure my family never worried about money. I wasn't flashy. I didn't show off. I believed in providing, not controlling. That mistake cost me more than I ever imagined. It started after my wife passed away. Losing her broke something inside me, and my children saw it. I became quieter, slower, more trusting. That's when my son suggested I move in with him and his wife. Temporarily. He said the house was too big for me alone. He said it would help with my grief. I believed him because he was my son. At first, things seemed fine. They gave me the guest room. Meals were polite. Conversations were shallow but respectful. But slowly, things changed. I noticed my mail no longer came directly to me. Bills disappeared before I could read them. Documents were moved. Questions were answered with vague smiles and phrases like, "Don't worry, Dad, we're handling it." I should have pushed back earlier. But grief makes you tired, and trust makes you blind. One evening, they called for a family meeting. My daughter-in-law sat at the head of the table, papers neatly stacked in front of her. My son sat beside her, stiff and quiet. She spoke, not him. She explained that for legal and tax reasons, it made sense for certain assets to be transferred. Temporary, she said, just paperwork. She spoke confidently, like someone used to getting her way. I asked a simple question. Why wasn't I consulted before this? That's when her tone changed. She smiled that same smirk and said, "Because you don't really have a choice anymore." She slid a document across the table. It was a power of attorney form, already signed, my signature, or at least something very close to it. My chest tightened. I knew instantly what had happened. A rush signing, a distracted moment, a page buried under others. I had trusted them to explain what I was signing. My son still didn't look at me. I told him I needed time. My daughter-in-law laughed softly and said, "Time is exactly what you don't have." Then she leaned closer and delivered the line that still echoes in my head. "You're finished." That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't confront them. I didn't argue. I simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision that led me to that room. And somewhere around 3 a.m., something shifted inside me. The grief faded. The fear disappeared. What replaced it wasn't anger, it was clarity. They thought I was powerless because I was quiet. They thought age meant ignorance. They believed silence was surrender. They were wrong. What they didn't know, what no one in that house knew, was that years ago, after watching a business partner betray another man, I made a rule for myself. Never leave everything in one place. Not my money, not my authority, not my future. I had prepared for a worst-case scenario long before my wife died. I just never imagined the threat would come from my own family. By morning, I had already made my first call. Not to a lawyer. Not yet. To someone who owed me a favor. Someone who understood patience, leverage, and timing. Someone who knew how to wait. As I hung up the phone, I heard laughter from the kitchen. My daughter-in-law was cheerful, confident, relaxed. She truly believed she had won. I picked up my coat, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and thought to myself, if she thinks I'm finished, then she's about to be very surprised. I left the house that morning without saying a word. No arguments. No slammed doors. I nodded politely, picked up my coat, and walked out like a man who had accepted defeat. From the corner of my eye, I saw my daughter-in-law exchange a look with my son. Relief mixed with triumph. To them, my silence confirmed everything they believed about me, that I was old, tired, and finally broken. The truth was very different. I drove to a small office building on the edge of the city, one I hadn't visited in years. It didn't have my name on the door. It never did. That was intentional. Inside, a man named Richard was already waiting for me. He stood when he saw me, not out of politeness, but respect. Years ago, I had helped him quietly when no one else would. I never asked for anything in return, but favors like that don't expire. I told him everything. Slowly, calmly, no emotion. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he nodded once and said, "They moved too fast." Those 3 words told me everything I needed to know. People who rush believe they're untouchable. They leave fingerprints everywhere. Richard explained what I already suspected. The power of attorney document my daughter-in-law waved around, it was narrow, limited, and more importantly, it didn't cover the most important parts of my estate. She had grabbed what she could see, not what actually mattered. That afternoon, I made the second call. This time to a lawyer, not a loud one, not a dramatic one. A quiet specialist who dealt with asset protection and fraud. He reviewed the documents and confirmed it. My signature had been used, but consent had been manipulated. That alone didn't win the case. But opened doors. Doors my daughter-in-law didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, back at the house, they grew bolder. I knew this because my phone started lighting up. Notifications from banks. Small changes at first. Account access requests. Address updates. They were testing boundaries, confident I wouldn't notice. They underestimated one thing. I check everything. Always have. I let them continue. That's the hardest part for most people to understand. Revenge isn't about reacting. It's about waiting until the other side makes mistakes. And they made plenty. Within a week, my daughter-in-law attempted to leverage my name for a loan. She assumed authority meant ownership. The bank didn't agree. The request was flagged. Quietly. No rejection notice. Just a note placed where it mattered. At the same time, Richard was working aside. Corporate records. Old partnerships. Shell companies that weren't really shells at all. More like locked rooms with my name on the key. Assets my family had never asked about because they assumed I'd told them everything. I hadn't. On Friday evening, I returned to the house for dinner. I acted smaller than ever. Apologetic. Grateful. I thanked my daughter-in-law for helping manage things. She smiled again, that same smirk, and said, "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason." My son still couldn't meet my eyes. During dessert, she casually mentioned that they were considering selling my old place, the house I had lived in for 22 years. She spoke like it was already decided. I nodded slowly and said nothing. Inside, I memorized every word. That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone in the guest room and opened my laptop. One by one, I moved pieces. Legal holds, beneficiary updates, trust activations that required no one's permission but mine. By dawn, the balance of power had shifted completely, even though nothing on the surface had changed. The following week was when panic started to creep in. My daughter-in-law began making phone calls in hushed tones. She stopped smiling as easily. She snapped at my son when she thought I wasn't listening. Something wasn't working the way she expected. Then came the call that told me it was time. She stormed into my room one afternoon, holding her phone, her face pale. "Did you move something?" she demanded. No pleasantries. No respect. Just fear, barely hidden. I looked up from my chair slowly and asked, "Move what?" She froze, because in that moment, she realized something terrible. She didn't actually know what I owned. She had assumed, and assumptions are dangerous. I stood up, calm and steady, and said, "You told me I was finished," so I prepared accordingly. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a response. And this was still only the beginning. The house felt different after that confrontation. Not louder, not tense in an obvious way, just unstable. Like everyone was pretending nothing had changed while carefully stepping around something dangerous. My daughter-in-law avoided me for 2 days. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled, overly polite. the tone people use when they realize they might have miscalculated. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling fast. My lawyer confirmed that the loan inquiry she tried to push using my authority had triggered internal reviews. Banks don't like uncertainty, and they like family power struggles even less. Every attempt she made after that was scrutinized more closely than the last. Accounts that once moved freely now required confirmations she didn't have. She blamed clerical errors. The truth was much simpler. She had lost momentum. I stayed exactly where she least wanted me, visible, calm, and observant. One evening, I overheard her argue with my son in the kitchen. She thought I was asleep. She was wrong. She accused him of not handling me properly. He finally spoke up, his voice shaking, saying, "He's not as helpless as you think." That single sentence told me everything. Doubt had entered the room. And once doubt enters, control starts to slip. The next move wasn't mine, it was hers. And it was a mistake. She called a family friend, someone she assumed would side with her, and tried to paint me as confused, unreliable, unstable. She suggested I might need medical oversight. What she didn't know was that this friend had once invested with me, had seen me negotiate contracts sharper than lawyers half my age. That conversation didn't go the way she expected. By the time she realized it, word had already traveled back to me. I didn't confront her. I never do when someone is digging their own hole. Instead, I invited them both to sit down again. Same table, same seats, different energy. I placed a folder in front of them, thinner than the last one, but heavier in impact. Inside were summaries, not threats, facts, trust structures activated years ago, conditional beneficiaries, time clauses, everything documented, clean, legal, and quiet. I explained nothing at first. I just let them read. My daughter-in-law's hands trembled as she flipped the pages. My son went pale. I finally spoke, slowly, clearly. "You assumed control meant ownership," I said. "You assumed silence meant weakness. And you assumed I had no safeguards. Every one of those assumptions was wrong." She tried to interrupt me. I raised one finger, not aggressively, just enough to stop her. She froze. I explained that nothing she had accessed could be sold, leveraged, or transferred without triggering automatic reviews. That certain attempts had already done exactly that. That moving forward, any further misuse would not just fail, it would leave records. Records that wouldn't disappear. For the first time, she apologized. Not sincerely. Strategically, she said there had been misunderstandings. That stress had caused poor communication. I listened politely. Then I delivered the line she never expected. "I'm not taking anything back," I said. "I'm stepping aside." Her eyes widened. This wasn't victory, it was confusion. I told them I'd be moving out by the end of the week, that I didn't want the house, that I wouldn't contest the limited access they had, as long as it stayed limited. I watched her try to process why someone would walk away when they finally had leverage, because real power doesn't need to be displayed. It just needs to exist. As I packed my things, my son finally came into the room alone. He apologized quietly. He admitted he'd let things go too far. I told him something he'll never forget. "You didn't lose my money. You lost my trust." That hurt him more than any lawsuit ever could. The day I left, my daughter-in-law stood at the door, forcing a smile. She believed the danger had passed, that I'd chosen peace over consequences. She was wrong again, because some consequences don't arrive immediately. They arrive when people feel safe. Moving out wasn't an escape. It was positioning. I rented a small, quiet place across town. Nothing impressive, nothing that would raise questions. To anyone watching, it looked like a defeated old man downsizing his life. My daughter-in-law certainly believed that story. Within days, she relaxed. The call stopped. The tension vanished. Control, she thought, had been restored. That's when people make their biggest mistakes. With me gone, she finally felt free to act. And she acted fast. She tried again to restructure assets, this time through a different route. A private lender, introduced by a friend who didn't ask too many questions. But private lenders asked something else instead. Proof, paper trails, guarantees. The moment she submitted documents tied to my name, the system responded exactly as designed. An automatic compliance alert was triggered. Quiet, internal, efficient. My lawyer called me that evening. Just 3 words. It's active now. That meant every attempt she made from that point forward would be logged, reviewed, and time-stamped. No drama, no confrontation, just a growing record of intent. She didn't know it yet, but she had already crossed a line from manipulation into something much more serious. At the same time, Richard moved his piece. A former partner of mine, long silent, was approached by my daughter-in-law with a proposal. She believed he'd be useful. What she didn't know was that I'd warned him weeks earlier. He recorded everything, every message, every promise, every assumption she made about my supposed incompetence. Meanwhile, my son was unraveling. The pressure she put on him increased. He started calling me late at night, not to apologize, but to ask questions. Why is the bank asking this? Why did this get frozen? I answered calmly. Honestly, I never blamed his wife. I didn't need to. The truth was doing that for me. Then came the email, a formal notice. Not to me, to her. The lender had withdrawn interest pending investigation. Accounts were temporarily restricted. Routine, they called it. Routine has a way of terrifying people who are hiding things. She showed up at my apartment unannounced the next morning. No smile this time. No confidence. Just panic wrapped in anger. You did this, she said, pointing a finger like an accusation would change facts. I poured myself coffee before answering. Took my time. I warned you, I said quietly. I told you control wasn't ownership. She threatened me then. Lawsuits, exposure, stories about my mental state. I listened, nodded, and let her finish. When she was done, I leaned forward and said, every threat you make adds another layer to the record. She stopped mid-sentence. That's when she realized she was no longer playing offense. She was defending, and she wasn't good at it. The next blow came from a place she never expected, her own circle. Friends distance themselves. Advisors stop returning calls. No one likes being near someone under scrutiny, especially when they suspect more is coming. My son came to see me 2 days later. Alone. He looked exhausted. He asked me what I wanted. I told him the truth. I want nothing, I said, except for this to stop. He nodded. He finally understood something she never would. This wasn't about winning. It was about consequences. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, my phone buzzed with one final update from my lawyer. They're preparing formal action, he said. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly, because once formal action begins, there's no smirk left to hide behind. Formal action doesn't arrive with shouting or flashing lights. It arrives quietly, in envelopes, emails, and carefully worded notices that change how people breathe. My daughter-in-law received the first one on a Tuesday morning. I know because my son called me an hour later, his voice tight, asking if I knew what was happening. I told him I did. The notice wasn't an accusation. It was worse. It was a request for clarification. Banks, lenders, and compliance teams don't accuse unless they already know the answer. They ask questions when they want you to explain yourself, and every explanation becomes evidence. My daughter-in-law tried to stay calm. She hired an attorney, a confident one, expensive, loud. He promised to shut this down quickly. He was wrong. Within days, additional requests followed. Transaction histories, authority confirmations, recorded communications. The web she'd spun to move faster now tightened around her. Every shortcut she took to feel powerful became a liability. And every time she tried to explain, the story changed just enough to make things worse. She came to me again, this time with my son. They sat across from me in silence. No threats, no confidence, just fear and exhaustion. She finally spoke, her voice trembling as she asked me to help her clear things up. She said it was all a misunderstanding. Stress, pressure, bad advice. She said families should protect each other. I looked at my son first. He couldn't meet my eyes. Then I spoke to her. You told me I was finished, I said calmly. You didn't ask for help then. She started crying. Real tears this time. I believed she was scared. I didn't believe she was sorry. I explained something she'd never considered. I didn't cause this. I didn't file complaints. I didn't make calls to authorities. All I did was remove myself and let her continue without me. The system responded to her actions, not my emotions. That's when she realized the truth. I wasn't her enemy. I was the last thing protecting her from herself. The investigation moved faster after that meeting. Advisors distanced themselves completely. Her attorney stopped promising quick resolutions and started warning her about exposure. My son learned details about her decisions he'd never known. Late-night loans, unauthorized negotiations, recorded conversations she'd sworn never existed. Their marriage cracked under the weight of it all. One evening, my son came alone again. He told me they were separating, at least temporarily. He said he didn't recognize the woman he'd married. I told him gently that people reveal themselves when they think they're untouchable. The final notice arrived 2 weeks later. A settlement offer. Quiet, contained, designed to prevent escalation. It required admissions, not public but documented. Restrictions. Oversight. Permanent. It also required something she feared more than money. Distance. She would have no authority, no access, no influence over anything tied to my name now or ever again. She agreed without negotiating. People don't negotiate when they know the alternative. The day she signed, she didn't look angry. She looked empty. I felt no joy watching her leave the building. No victory. Just a calm sense of closure. Revenge, when done properly, doesn't feel explosive. It feels final. My son stood beside me in the hallway afterward. He asked me how long I had planned this. I told him the truth. I planned to protect myself years ago, I said. Everything else happened because someone underestimated me. He nodded slowly. That night, I returned to my quiet apartment, made myself dinner, and sat by the window. My phone buzzed once, a confirmation that everything was complete. The woman who told me I was finished had lost everything she tried to control. And tomorrow, I would decide what came next. The morning after everything was finalized, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of stress, that was gone, but because my mind felt unusually clear. No more waiting. No more watching pieces move from the shadows. The chapter with my daughter-in-law was closed, sealed by signatures and silence. She never contacted me again. My son did. He came over later that week, alone, carrying the weight of someone who had learned a hard lesson too late. He apologized again, this time without excuses. He told me he was starting over, slowly, carefully. I didn't lecture him. I didn't punish him. Some lessons don't need to be repeated aloud. They sit quietly and change how a person lives. I told him he was still my son. But trust, once cracked, has to be rebuilt brick by brick. With distance came perspective. I realized something important. The real damage wasn't financial. Money can be protected, replaced, recovered. What almost slipped away was my sense of self, my dignity. And that's something no document can give back once it's gone. I move again, this time by choice. A small house near the water. Quiet mornings. Long walks. No one managing my life. But me. I kept my routine simple. Coffee. Reading. Thinking. Peace is underrated until you earn it. Occasionally, I heard updates through mutual contacts. My daughter-in-law had changed circles. Changed cities. She avoided any situation that might connect her back to me. Not out of fear, but because some bridges, once burned properly, don't invite curiosity. People ask me now if I regret not fighting harder, louder, sooner. I don't, because the most effective revenge isn't humiliation. It isn't public destruction. It's allowing someone to face the consequences of their own arrogance while you step aside untouched. I never raised my voice, never threatened, never begged. I simply stopped being useful to someone who thought they owned me. One afternoon, months later, I received a short message from my son. Just 3 words. I understand now. That was enough. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Never confuse kindness with weakness, and never assume silence means surrender. Some people are quiet because they're tired. Others are quiet because they're calculating. When my daughter-in-law smirked and told me I was finished, she believed the story she wanted to tell. I believed in the truth. And in the end, the truth didn't need to announce itself. It just waited